Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Schmidt-Cruz, Interim Director of the Center for Global and Area Studies and Associate Professor of Spanish and Portuguese. I want to welcome all of you who have joined us this afternoon for Qiu Xiaolong's presentation. This talk is part of the Global and Area Studies class and lecture series entitled Globalization, Organized Crime, and Terrorist Networks. It is also part of the Department of Foreign Languages and Literature's Distinguished Scholar Lecture Series and is co-sponsored by the Department of English. It is an honor for me to introduce Qiu Xiaolong. Qiu Xiaolong is a poet, literary translator, crime novelist, critic, and academic. Born in Shanghai, he became interested in English language literature and poetry in his teens. After studying in Beijing at the Chinese Institute of Foreign Languages and Literatures, he was assigned to the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences as a poet and translator. He established a reputation as a literary translator, acclaimed for his Chinese translation of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. He came to the United States as a Ford Fellow in 1988. The following year, the Tiananmen Square massacre occurred, and he decided to stay on in the U.S. as a graduate student, earning a Ph.D. in comparative literature at the Washington University of St. Louis. His dissertation was entitled Love in Classical Chinese Literature, a topic we can occasionally glimpse when the protagonist of his detective novels waxes poetic or romantic. Among Mr. Qiu's literary production are two books of poetry translation, his own poetry collection entitled Lines Around China, His collection of short stories, Years of Red Dust, traces the changes in China from the early days of the Communist Revolution in 1949 to the modernization movement of the late 90s, all from the perspective of an alley in Shanghai. One of his most recent publications, Disappearing Shanghai, Photographs and Poems of an Intimate Way of Life, also deals with urban transition. It is a photographic exploration of life in the old and rapidly disappearing quarters of Shanghai and includes poems and essays by Qiu. Qiu is probably best known for his award-winning murder mysteries set in Shanghai and protagonized by police inspector Chen. The series now numbers 8 novels, with the 9th, Shanghai Redemption, set to be released this July. We're waiting for it. Qiu's books have sold over 1 million copies and have been published in 20 languages. And Qiu just gave me a very beautiful edition in Spanish of Red Mandarin Dress, called Seda Roja in Spanish. Qiu travels internationally on a regular basis for lecture tours. As a matter of fact, I first found out about Qiu's books in Argentina when he was an invited guest at the Buenos Aires crime fiction festivals. Yeah. So, how did a poet and translator come to win fame as a detective fiction writer? Qiu explains that after a visit home to China in 1955, he wanted to write a novel about Chinese society in transition, but was having a hard time putting his material together. He had always been an avid reader of mysteries and found that the genre provided a framework for social commentary. That's how his first Inspector Chen novel, Death of a Red Heroine, was written. His editor liked it, asked for a second one, and the series was launched. Death of a Red Heroine went on to win the prestigious Anthony Award for Best First Novel by a Mystery Writer and was ranked as one of the 5 best political novels of all time by the Wall Street Journal. Qiu's Inspector Chen novels feature quotes from ancient and modern poets, wisdom from Confucius, plenty of Chinese banquets, as well as criminal procedure. These novels speak to the recent Chinese past, specifically the Chinese Cultural Revolution. For example, in Red Mandarin Dress, and they also deal with present-day problems. For instance, Don't Cry, Tai Lake is about ecological crime, and Enigma of China is based on crimes set in cyberspace. Qiu's plots, often based on real-life corruption scandals, political intrigues, and murders, blend a captivating mystery with insight into the problems of contemporary China as the burgeoning superpower struggles to shift from old world socialism to new world capitalism. Qiu says that while he writes for both Americans and Chinese, when he discusses details of Chinese life, he has an American audience in mind. He explains that writing in the United States gives him a different perspective, as if he were both an insider and outsider simultaneously. Quoting from a Song Dynasty poet, he says, "You cannot see the face of Mount Lu because you are in the mountains." We are very glad that he left the mountains and decided to write about them in his intriguing novels. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mr. Qiu Xiaolong.
Thank you, Professor Schmidt-Kratz, and for your wonderful, wonderful introduction. And also thank you for Professor Chen, but also my older classmates more than 30 years ago. So it's really wonderful to be here. Now, the topic today has something to do with this global age. And actually, I think our meeting here speaks about that as well. As Professor Kratz mentioned, we come to know each other through writers and literature in Argentina, right? It's around the world. And also with my older classmate, Professor Chen, it's more than 30 years, but again, with email and all that, and we come together. Now, for today's talk, the title is A Chinese Cop in the Global Age. Now, this may be something we have noticed, of later, a lot of detective story, crime novels have something to do with this kind of international phenomenon. We have, don't worry. We have, about 2 years ago, the girls with dragon tattoo, right? It's another country. And also Da Vinci Code, a lot happens in France, right? So it's kind of interesting phenomenon, and more and more people are writing and reading this kind of international, crime story. Of course, we can have a lot of explanation why this is happening like that. One simple way to say that could be nowadays, people really want to know more about what happens, say, in China, in Japan, and in other countries. And at the same time, they also read a detective story, right? So it's like, you kill two birds with one stone, right? You read a mystery at the same time. You also read a lot about a country foreign to you. In fact, a few years ago, a German tourist company had a program called Followed Inspector Chen to China. So basically what they do is, all the restaurants mentioned in my novels, well, in the English version, I mentioned the real name, so they can find that. All the hotel, inspections stayed in China. They have, tourists do that. And I do get some emails from time to time. Some people want to go to China. They actually use the novel as a guidebook. So I have no objection to that, right? As long as you find something helpful. I cannot say, oh, you have to read that as a literature book or as a detective story or as tourist guidebook. As long as you find that book, I cannot complain about that. We are live in this global age, so nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Well, this is basically a point I did for the. Let's just see some of the cover first, okay? As Professor Kratz mentioned, these books are being translated into quite a few languages. Like this one, The Leftist, is a newest one. The English version actually is coming out, well, according to latest information today from a reader here, September. I did not learn that before. My knowledge was it was coming out in July, but he has been following all the latest information on Amazon, so that's right. So, but that's a French edition. The French edition came out last May. So it's 1 year earlier. Don't ask me how and why. It's mystery to me. It's mystery to me. But one thing you can see that is they also changed the title because the English title is Shanghai Redemption. But the French title, if I translate literally, is Blue Dragon, White Tiger. I don't like it. It's I argued with him because in Chinese it even be worse. It's Qinglong Baifu, right? So it's a lot of connotation in this kind of title. It's not what I want to say, but these. Again, in this global age, these foreign publishers, they always have their say because they say, well, we know the market. We know the French market. You don't. So our title will sell. And so far, I think they're right. It's been on their best list for several months. So again, I cannot complain. But I still don't like it. I don't like it. And that, you can see in the middle, they also changed that, the English title. I like that very much, is Enigma of China. Actually, I got the inspiration for the title in the museum in Madrid. I mentioned that because I was, watching a painting by Dari. So I think, it's from this painting I got this title. But again, they changed that. Okay, they say Cyber China sounds better. So it's always this kind of struggle from time to time. Some of the translation, I don't even know what language it is, because usually it's through the agent. So usually when it's published, they just send me a copy. This one I know it's from Germany, but these two, sometimes I have to guess. Maybe it's from some other countries. Oh, all these are Spanish. Yeah, these are Spanish, yeah. And yeah, the Spanish one for the Shanghai Redemption apparently has also to come out in September because they have to be the same time with the English one. All these Italian and these are not the Inspector Chen novels. Okay, this is Years of Red Dust. The French version you can see has two. I like the cover because if you put them together, it's one picture. You see one Chinese character, Cai, right? If you put them together, that's German, that's Italian. Again, this one was published in French first. It was serialized in Le Monde first for a whole summer, and then published. And then they have the second volume out. But the English second volume, I don't know when. They say Inspection is more popular, short story can wait a little bit, so let's wait. This is a graphic novel that's coming out the end of this year in France. Again, I don't like it. I don't think that's my Inspector Chen. But again, I don't have control about that. But at least the Chinese characters are right. Okay, so that much I have to give them a credit. But other than that, I don't think that's. Well, that's just some basic information about my character, Inspection, and okay, that's about him. Now, Professor Krause just mentioned I used to write poetry. How and why I switched to writing crime fictions, right? Well, it just happened. It's also kind of mystery to myself as well. In 1995, I went back to China for the first time after maybe 7 or 8 years. So I was really, really impressed with all the change there. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write something about that. I write a long poem. It's published. It's titled Don Quixote in China. But I was not happy because I think if you want to write about something about a society in transition, novel might be a more convenient genre, right? Poetry is about your personal feeling. So I tried my hand at fiction. So at that time, I did not think I was going to write a crime novel. It's just a novel about, China in transition with the main character intellectual because I want him to think why and how things are happening in China. But I had a hard time because I never, written poetry before. So I said, what should I do? But of course, I like mystery. I read, a lot of crime fiction before. So I thought maybe I could use that as a framework, right? As a ready-made structure. I was lazy. I thought, okay, I tried that. So I don't have to worry about structure. So I put them together into this structure. But as I did so, I found that quite convenient, actually serving my purpose quite well, because maybe I can say from the very beginning, I did have something like a sociological approach, because I want to write about the Chinese society, right? Now, when you have a crime story, a cop, a detective, it actually serves that purpose quite well. My main character, Inspection, will walk around the city, right? Knock on people's door and try to find, all the answers. Maybe not, he cannot always find that, but at least he tried that, right? So it served my purpose. I think it's okay. But I was not sure whether this is a mystery or not, so I sent my manuscript to an American publisher, and she read it, and she sent back to me. She said, we like it. We want you to sign a contract for 3 books. I did not even have an agent. So I was really flattered. Wow, okay, for 3 books, right? So I signed, but then comes the trouble, because I have to write a second crime book, third crime book. So far, 9 novels in the Inspector Chen series, and 1 poem collection. It's lines around China. It's basically under my name, but there will be another poetry collection. It's titled Poems of Inspector Chen. Again, it's kind of a trick because nobody wants to publish poetry nowadays. So if I borrow Inspector Chen's name, things might, change a little bit. And so far it worked with the French publisher and Italian publisher. They are going to do that because people will read Inspector Chen novels, so some fan will buy poetry anyway. So it's a little bit like Shanghai's Peng Cai. I don't know how to translate that. You remember that? Like in the Shanghai food market, you sell some good stuff, but then you have to buy some not that good stuff, right? Because at that time, it's kind of Shanghai policy. So I think I got inspiration from that, maybe. And I'm working on one after Shanghai Redemption, so I don't know when it will be completed. Now, as I mentioned about the sociological approach and about the global age, one thing I would like to say here is, in one sense, we all live in this global age, no question about that. But to write in this global age, I have, encountered problems and try to learn some lessons. So I would like, in today's talk, to mention some things I have encountered to write crime novels in this global age. Now, one thing I think it is important, at least for me, is you always have to have your implied reader in mind. This can be especially important at the present time. Because in my situation, I'm from China, I'm writing English, and of course, my first readers are the English-speaking readers, right? So, at least in my writing, I should be keeping that in mind, because I cannot have my readers read my book and then have all the questions, what does that mean? Because my readers cannot be as familiar with what I'm writing about China as I do, right? Because I'm so familiar with the Cultural Revolution, with all the political movements in China, with corruption, with pollution. I'm familiar with that. But my readers are not. And at the same time, I also have to keep in mind, I'm not writing my academic book. With my academic book, I can give a lot of footnotes, right? And I can explain. But in writing novels, you cannot do that. And especially for some of the readers, okay, they want to really enjoy reading the detective story. I cannot, interrupt the narrative flow to add in the footnote, oh, that's what it means, right? But so that's something I think I struggled. And even today, I'm still struggling a little bit because, you can try all kinds of ways, like, you put in the background information or in a dialogue to make that as naturally as possible. But having said that, some reader will come to you to say, no, you're doing too much. I understand. Why you want to, give lecture to us, right? I think one reader even mentions that in some in the Amazon review. She said, I understand your Chinese poem. Why you always try to explain that to me? It's kind of insulting, okay? But sometimes from other readers, they will come to me from different perspectives. No, it's still not clear. Maybe next book you can explain a little bit more. So it's like, you need like keep a balance. How much is too much or is not enough? I had a talk with a Chinese writer. Maybe Chen knows her, Wang Yi. It's also from Shanghai. She once complains to me about, when her book translated into foreign languages, not too many people are reading. And I said, maybe because, when you wrote your book, you had in your mind all the reader familiar with Shanghai because she reads all the roads about Shanghai story. But when a truthful translator, a loyal translator, does a job, he or she can only translate truthfully, right? Cannot add something. So if the reader, spend 2 hours reading your first 10 pages, how can you expect them to really, read a lot of your books? She thought about that. She was not convinced because she said, no, it's like, you should not, just think about the readers out of China. You're a Chinese author, right? Of course, you should certainly write in Chinese. Well, that's a difficult question. It's people certainly can see from different perspectives. Personally, I don't see anything wrong. Since we are living, in this global age, why we cannot write for the global audience, right? We don't have to limit ourselves, oh, I'm only writing for Chinese. Because 10 years ago, people even may say, if you don't write for Chinese readers, that's all means something like a betrayal. Actually, in some of the Chinese review about my books, some people say something like that. He used to write in Chinese. Now why he writing English? Is that because he wants to please a Western audience? Of course, that's not true, right? But some people still think that way. But having said that, keep the implied reader in mind, you also have to be aware, another, I think, equally important thing. It's also about what your readers really want to read. Because if I write a story, the same way as an American author or British author write a story, of course, again, nothing wrong with that. A lot of books written that way. But I'm a Chinese author. I certainly can try to write in the authentic Chinese way, right? So this is like universal and particular. You can try to do that. And for that reason, it's not only the story, the subject matter, of course, that's happened in China. In my novels, I try to introduce what I call the Chinese elements. For example, in my novels, there are quite a lot of poems. Now, of course, I have to make a confession here first. At first, it's maybe partially from a very selfish motive, because I love poetry. I want to publish poetry. Even if I could publish some, not too many readers nowadays, right? So I thought if I could smuggle poems into fiction, you certainly will have more readers. Actually, T.S. Eliot did something similar. He wrote plays, because he believes that way more people watch the plays will also enjoy the poetry. But apart from this selfish motive, it's also from the Chinese tradition, because in classic Chinese novels, there are a lot of poems. Often in the Chinese novel, in one chapter, at the beginning of the chapter, you have a poem, right? And when a new character is introduced, you have another poem. And at the end of the chapter, another poem. So I can certainly claim I'm following the Chinese tradition. Okay? But it's also worth experimenting, because I believe in narrative, you may have different level of lyrical intensity. It's just like Shakespeare play. Sometimes intensity requires a verse, right? Yeah, we do that. Why not? So it's my American publisher at first was rather hesitant about that. She said, well, it's no one did this in the crime fiction like that before. They want to read murder, right? Not poetry. And they were not sure. And also about my character, this one, a poet translate himself, right? So they thought, we're not sure. But it's to our price. Actually, a lot of readers like that. They even wrote to the publisher. They say, we like, the poems in the fiction. And that's why some publishers even want me to translate some poems into collections, Dansong Dynasty poetries and some love poems. So that's how it came about. It's all just like random harvest to me. Now, since I'm here, okay. This is just another example of the poems in the fiction. This is a poem in the, I think in the second book, A Loyal Character Dancer. First, I try to quote, for the same reason, I try to quote Louis MacNeice, a British poet. I love his poems. But it was vetoed by my American publisher, saying it's too expensive to quote. You cannot quote here. So I argued with my publisher. I said, no, I think the story here requires a poem. So finally, it's compromise. This is like a parody, or of the Louis MacNeice poems. As long as it's not his own poem, it's okay, right? I can do that. So finally, yes, this is the version got into the novel. It's into the novel. Yeah, I think even some of the rhyme, like pardon, garden, so it's also from the original poem. Now, apart from this kind of poetry tradition, another thing I think I benefited from the Chinese tradition is also about the, you can say, the tradition of crime writing in classical Chinese literature. Now, there's often one question to me about whether you have a tradition, right, of Chinese crime novels. The answer is yes and no. We do have a tradition of 公案小说, or you can say judge stories. Now, the judge may not be an exact translation because these judges in the Chinese stories are more powerful, like Judge Bao. Let me see. Let me find some of the judge picture here. Yeah, the traditional Chinese. The most famous one, of course, we know is the Judge Di, right? Gulux, actually, he's not even Chinese, okay, but he wrote in the Chinese tradition. But we also have Judge Bao, Judge Su, all the Chinese judge story. Actually, Judge Bao was prime minister, not just the judge of Song Dynasty. Now, if you talk about that tradition, you may also notice one difference, the difference about the suspense. Because in English and American crime story, or in European crime story, the suspense usually is, we even have the word, whodunit, right? We don't know. Usually, like toward the last page of the book, we find, oh, who's the murderer? But if you read some of the Chinese detective story, you will find often halfway through the book, we already know who the murderer is. Sometimes can be even earlier. So the suspense is not there. Okay, it's about, we already know who murdered, but then how can you punish the murderer? Because the murderer happened to be the emperor's son-in-law, right? We know the story. And also the murderer can to be highly connected, okay? So, well, at first I was not aware of that first because some critic here also mentioned that to me. We read your story, like in my first novel, Death Red Heroine. Halfway through, I already knew who the bad guy is, right? How can you write a murder story like this? I thought about that. I thought, well, then I realized maybe subconsciously I was influenced by the Chinese tradition. Even I was not fully aware of that. Because that's, number one, you can say, in traditional Chinese society, a detective cannot really make a difference because the legal system, right? You have to have somebody a bit more powerful, like Judge Bao, or at least like some chief inspector, right? Not just like an ordinary cop. You have to, because with this kind of power structure, with this kind of relatively weak, legal system, right? You have to solve problems. And that is why the suspense part, it's, yes, legally we know how the situation is, but then how you can proceed, right? How you can punish the murderer. So that's another thing, it's make, at least my writing, different from contemporary crime writing in the English language. And in addition to that, I also did some experiment, trying to make my my writing, on the one hand, universal, on the other hand, as authentically Chinese as possible. Again, it's something like come to me sometime just by chance, okay? I'll give you one example. I would like to say something about this book first. This is experiment. All the pictures were taken by my friend, Howard French. He is a well-known New York Times journalist, but he also has a passion for photography. So he spent 5 years taking all the pictures, the Shanghai old lane and things like that. It's wonderful, wonderful. I have no idea how you can walk into people's home like this and take pictures. I cannot do that, but he is really marvelous in his way, and people allow him, even Lao Wai, to take a picture like this. We try to do something like imagist poetry. So he put all the image in front of me, and I try to write poems. But this is mainly to his credit. It's a wonderful album. Now, back to the thing I was talking about. This is all about the food and the stuff. We don't have to do about that. That's about another book. I have a food book in German language. So it's one thing I experimented is, as I mentioned, in authenticity, right? Yes, I'm writing in English, but that does not mean the Chinese language is like something totally disappeared from the back of my mind. So I will give you one example. Now, we may have read one wonderful essay by George Orwell, The Politics and English Language, right? It's a well-known essay. And in that essay, he has one point. He says, a good writer should try to avoid cliches at all costs. I totally agree with that. But of course, it's difficult for me. English is my second language, right? Sometimes I don't know whether this is cliche or not. Sometimes I have to ask my daughter, is that cliche? I try to impress people, but maybe I just use the overused expression. So in one of my books, I think that's in the first book, I want to describe one thing about Starbucks or McDonald's appeared in Shanghai, overnight everywhere, right? So first I just write something like this. So I thought, well, it's probably okay, right? This is a fact, and but then you think, okay, that's not good enough, right? Language-wise, you should find something exciting. Okay, then I thought, okay, maybe I should use a different English verb, mushroom up, okay? So it's better than appear here and there, right? But then I have thought about that. I still not happy because a lot of people have used that. Then suddenly, I don't know why and how, I thought of a Chinese cliche, 雨后春笋. We know that, right? Appears like bamboo shoots after spring rain. In China, when you say that, nothing fresh about that at all. It's a cliche. But when you translate literally into English, I thought, well, it's maybe not too bad. Let's try that. So I just put it there. And when the book came out, the NPR, the reviewer, picked up this phrase, how fresh the language. So sometimes, of course, it's kind of giving me another reason to be lazy, right? When you cannot find a really satisfying expression, try to look up from your another language, right? Maybe, I think in this particular case, maybe in the Chinese culture, bamboo shoots, nothing new, original, right? But the English, it's kind of exotic. You cannot find that in the market, right? So maybe that's why it appears original, because of that. Of course, it does not work always like that. Sometimes do, sometimes does not. And okay, maybe just say one more thing. And another thing I try, to experiment in my writing is to introduce, you can say, double perspective. And, in one sense, you can say, I have a lot of disadvantages, like, English is not my first language, right? I'm writing it in English nowadays. I'm writing about China, but I don't live in China nowadays. That's another disadvantage. But then, in this global age, maybe a lot of things can be turned upside down. You can try to do something about that. So that's what I try to do, is what I call, in my writings, I try to keep the double perspective. On the one hand, I'm outside to China today now. Even though I go back twice a year, sometimes even longer, my friends, they are still treat me as outside, okay. Of course, that's one good thing. As outside, I enjoy a lot of dinners. They always treat me, okay. But I really want they treat me still as inside, right? And so I keep this kind of two perspectives. One is at a certain distance. Now, Professor Krauss quoted a poem. I think that's very much to the point, because if you are always there inside the mountain, don't have distance, you may not see things clearly. But at the same time, by going back to China from time to time, and nowadays with internet, with TV, you can really keep quite close, still making yourself inside. So that's what I try to do in my writing. I think I will just give you one more example for today's talk, and about this kind of double perspective. I think I also mentioned that either in the first novel or second novel. This Inspector Chen is a bookish man in his way, poetic but also bookish. And because in his younger days, he studies literature in a park. So when he becomes a cop himself, years later, he walks into a park and sees a young girl reading a book on a bench in the park. So he's very bookish in his imagination. This young, pretty girl must be reading a poem, or maybe English poem, right? So he walked close to the girl, and to his surprise, she's reading a book about stock market. Now, when I tell the story to my friends in China, they say, there's nothing new about that, right? Very few people today would read a book, poetry book, in a park. It's only imagination. So yes, you can say, in one sense, that is true. But in another sense, you can also say, maybe because I don't live in China all the time nowadays, right? That is why I will still, for my friends who live in China all the time, they take this for granted. Yes, she should be reading a stock market book, right? Why should I read a poetry? But for me, because, more or less outside, right? Still surprised about that. So I think for my main character, Inspection, he is this kind of, poetic, a little bit distant, from the system, but at the same time, try to work something out in the system, even though he finds it's more and more difficult for him to do so. Actually, in book number 9, Shanghai Redemption, and he is really in big trouble. But he's not finished yet. We don't have to worry about that. But he's more and more difficult, and I don't know what will happen to him in the next book. But I think that's about, maybe we can have some time to have some questions or whatever. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cho, for a fascinating lecture. And now, as he said, we have some time for questions.
Any questions? I try my best.
You mentioned, well, your detective is a literary detective, and he's got a poetic soul. And I wonder if you're familiar with Mario Conde, who is the detective of Leonardo Padura Fuentes in Cuba. He's also a policeman who is secretly a writer, and he spends all of the novels trying to finish a novel of his own while he's working out all of these crimes. And I wondered if you were familiar with Padura and Mario Conde.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar. I did meet with one Cuba crime novelist in Sweden. Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with. I talked to some critics about this kind of literary detective. They mention another example. That's by the UK author. What's her name? Recently passed away. She has P.D. James. She has one character, Daglish, right? He also writes poem, but they say there's one difference. With Daglish, we always know he's writing poem, but we never read a poem in a detective story, right? So I think I can say my character is unique in that sense. He writes poem in the books.
So I'm curious to know, as you've gone from novel 1 to novel 8 and now 9, have your interest in, or your motives for telling a Western audience about China changed as China has changed? So when you started out, what did you want people in the West to know about China? And is that different today from where it was when you started?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, there are certainly some changes, in the process. I think in the first book, this main character is certainly more idealistic okay, and he believes that he can make a difference within the system. Towards book number 9, you know, the Shanghai Redemption, actually he becomes quite cynical, quite disillusioned. He is not ready, like, you know, to give up yet, and he still like stays in the system, but he's certainly more cynical, disillusioned, and more practical, not just like, you know, as idealistic as the first one. Yes, and also, yeah, also, you know, the background also changed quite a lot. That's something pointed out to me by another critic. In my first book, I talks about the housing system in China. At that time, you know, all the house were assigned by the government to the people. But nowadays, we know it's totally different, right? The housing price, you know, really soared in China. So people have something different to worry about. So yeah, it's changed as well.
Thank you so much. This was a really, really interesting talk, and I just love Delaware. So I wanted to ask you about that particular book, if I could.
Yes.
And one of the things that struck me in your talk is you were interested in China as experiencing transition, and that was so clear in that particular novel, that there's that you're introducing readers to Shanghai, a particularly local place, but also a time, and that time is one where the past is being erased, streets are being renamed, buildings are being torn down, and I was curious about that feeling of sort of having to introduce us to a particular moment before it disappears. Was that something you were going for as you were writing? There's a feeling of introducing us to a moment in time that may just shift immediately into something else. I was just really struck by that when I read the novel. You were building a world, but it wasn't just a place, it was a moment. And that's one of the things I loved about that novel.
Yes, when I, you know, wrote that novel, as I mentioned, I did not even set out to write a murder story, right? I really wanted, you know, to capture, you know, that particular phase. You know, the society is changing, something is disappearing. Yeah, I think, you know, with the subsequent books, because, you know, the publisher really wanted to do this, really want to kill somebody at the very beginning, things like that. But with the first one, yes, because at that time I did not even worry about whether it will be published or not. I just want to write the book in my own way, in my own ways, yeah. And I was also, I think, more clear about that time period, because I think in the whole series, only in this book I mention specifically this is about a period in the 90s, early 90s. I mentioned that. But other few books, I did not even mention what particular year the story takes place. Most of the story can say happens now, like, you know, Shanghai Redemption or Enigma of China, you can see quite recently. And one reason, of course, I still want to go back to China, right? I don't want to say, you know, this story happened this year, but that's okay. Yeah. Sure.
This is a little personal.
Uh-huh.
When you are constructing this story,
Yes.
or the story, are you thinking in Chinese or you are thinking in English?
For my first book, I at least tried a little bit to think in both languages. But it did not really work out that way, because if it's like, you know, when you have some sentence, you believe, oh, it's beautiful Chinese sentence, right? But you translate that into English, sometimes it does not work that way. The English sentence really sucks. Then what can you do, right? You have to rewrite the sentence. And then the meaning change as well, because when you do that, some new meaning come into the picture. So it takes a lot of time, and you're not still satisfied with that. So I think halfway through the first book, maybe even less than halfway, I decided, okay, I have to do in one language. So I think English and write English. Yeah, well, at that time, a lot of other things happened because it's very difficult for me to publish in Chinese at that time. So that's one of the reasons, if you want to have the reader, and you have to write, in. But nowadays, I still write something in Chinese, like some short essays, some short poems. I still do that. Yeah.
Yeah, do have a question. I appreciate it. Talk a lot. I mean, you're a scholar, right? That's really see learning deeper increasingly scholar. So do you have, I want to know if you have any like insider in Shanghai something like that. So how do you, I just want to know when you write,
Okay, I think you have several questions. I try to answer in different parts. For one, at my time, all the college students were state assigned to the job, regardless of your own interest or passion. I did have one friend. He majored in English, but he was assigned to work in the Shanghai Police Bureau. So he talked to me quite a lot about, not happy. He wants to be a poet, want to do, literature, but he worked as a. So that's real. At that time, it's right right? It's the government to say, okay, you work there. You cannot say no. So that's one thing. Also, for me, I think it's interesting if one character has this kind of inner tension or inner contradiction between himself, right? On the one hand, he believes he can do some work as a cop, but at the same time, he always has a dream about the other side, like the side as like a scholar, as a poet. So that also makes the character a little bit more interesting, not just one-dimensional. So he also not only need to deal with the outside situation, but also the inner contradiction. About the academic, and also the police work. At least in one book, I think that is in Red Mandarin Dress. Actually, I used some of idea in one of my academic paper into this murder story. If you have not read that, you maybe find that interesting, because I think this is also happened to be a book I wrote fast, because some of the main idea was in my academic paper already, so I just put that in the story. And I'm very glad to say it's like, some French producers, director, they're trying to make that into a movie right now. Yeah, so sometimes academic also helps, definitely. And also like, the concept implied reader, I learned that in my comparative literature classroom, so it helps. So, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.